They say some artists are born with brushes in their hands. She was born with pain stitched into her bones. When Frida Kahlo opened her eyes in a blue house in Coyoacán, no one imagined her face would one day stare from museum walls, posters, and protest banners across the world. A fragile girl with a fierce gaze, destined to turn her own broken body into a battlefield of color. Childhood for her was never just childhood. Polio came early, shrinking one leg, leaving her with a limp the world would never quite let her forget. Other children pointed, whispered, laughed, but she stared back, unblinking. If her body betrayed her, her will refused to. Her father, a photographer with trembling hands and sharp eyes, taught her how to look, not just at faces, but at storms behind them. He suffered seizures. She knew what it meant to collapse and rise again. Their bond was built from shared fragility and shared stubbornness. At school, she didn't blend in, she invaded. One of the few girls in a sea of boys in gray uniforms, she wore suits, cracked jokes, argued like a lawyer. She wanted to be a doctor, to study bodies from the inside out. She didn't know yet that her own body would become her most difficult patient. Then came the bus. A September afternoon in 1925, laughter, crowded seats, a sudden screech of metal. A streetcar slammed into their bus, twisting wood and flesh together. An iron handrail pierced her pelvis and exited through her hip. In 1 second, her future as a doctor shattered like glass. They carried her out like a broken doll painted by accident. Her body was torn in places that don't heal cleanly. Spine cracked, ribs fractured, foot crushed, pelvis destroyed. Doctors doubted she would live. She decided she would not only live, she would look her pain straight in the eye and paint it. The plaster corset became her second skin. Months trapped in bed, her world shrank to a ceiling, a mirror, and her thoughts. Her parents hung a mirror above her so she could see something other than pain. She looked up, saw her own face, and understood. If she could not leave her body, she would explore it like a planet. She asked for brushes, paints, a small easel that could lean over her bed. Every movement hurt, every line cost her energy she barely had. But on the blank canvas, she had more freedom than in the real world. If doctors mapped her bones, she would map her soul. Her first portraits were not soft fantasies. She painted herself with dark eyebrows like joined wings, direct, almost confrontational stare. No airbrushing, no mercy. The world would later turn that face into a brand. She painted it as a question. Can you bear to look at me as I am? Pain became her permanent roommate. Operations followed operations. Spine, foot, pelvis, endless needles and white corridors. Most people hide suffering behind curtains and polite smiles. Frida dragged hers into the light, gave it flowers, thorns, and blood, and nailed it to the wall. Then she met Diego Rivera. He was everything she physically was not. Huge, loud, already famous, murals sprawling across walls like political storms. She brought her paintings to him not as a fan, but as a challenger. "Do I have talent?" she asked. He looked, paused, and said, "More than that." Their love was never gentle. He was a serial betrayer, a genius with pockets full of women's phone numbers and crumbs of political slogans. She called him the love of her life, and also like another accident. Together, they were less a couple and more a volcanic system. When they married, people joked, "It's like an elephant marrying a dove." Photographers loved the contrast, her small, straight frame beside his massive body, but in private, the emotional weight was reversed. her soul often felt heavier than both of them. They moved between Mexico and the United States like traveling circus stars. Detroit, New York, San Francisco. Industrial skylines, smoke, long, shiny cars. Diego painted massive walls about workers and revolution. Frida painted tiny canvases about organs that bled in silence. In Detroit, she lost more than she could paint at once. A pregnancy ended in blood and hospital sheets, her body refusing again to carry life without breaking. Lying in a foreign clinic, she realized motherhood might never be hers. So she gave birth to paintings instead. Her canvases filled with roots and veins, cords and spines. Bodies opened like anatomy charts, but instead of labels, there were tears and small animals watching. She refused the polite distance of traditional portraits. If life cut her open, she would show the wound, not the bandage. Diego's betrayals multiplied like brushstrokes. Lovers in studios, in hallways, in the spaces between political meetings. But one betrayal sliced deeper than the rest, when he slept with her younger sister, Christina. The wound was not just marital, it was family, a double fracture. She cut her hair, the braids he loved, letting them fall like dead snakes onto the floor. She put on a man's suit again, sat in a chair, and painted herself as both victim and judge. If he wanted a fragile doll, she would become something else entirely. Sharp, androgynous, impossible to categorize. Her love life did not end with Diego. She took lovers of her own, men and women, poets, painters, even a certain exiled Russian revolutionary named Trotsky. For a woman in Catholic Mexico, this was more than scandal. It was a declaration. If my body is broken, my desire is not. Her politics bled into her paintings like red into water. She wore indigenous Tehuana dresses not as costumes, but as flags. Her unibrow and faint mustache, features other women hid, she emphasized. In a world that sold fragile femininity, she painted a face that refused to apologize for existing. Exhibitions began to appear like small windows in distant cities. In New York and Paris, critics struggled to categorize her. Surrealist, folk, primitive, genius? She replied simply, "I paint my own reality." While they argued over labels, her images quietly hooked themselves into people's memories. Back home, her health continued its slow, merciless negotiation. Spine surgeries stacked up like unfinished sketches. She wore steel and leather corsets painted with cracked columns and broken hearts. Each brace intended to hold her up also reminded her how easily she could fall. She painted herself with thorns piercing her neck, nails stuck into her skin, a split body caught between two worlds. Some viewers saw shock value, others, confession. For Frida, it was simply honest autobiography, written not with words, but with wounds. Students began to gather around her like small moons around a battered planet. She taught not from theory, but from scars. Nothing is absolute, she told them. Everything changes. Love, politics, the body. But one thing, she insisted, must stay. The courage to show the truth of what you feel. By the 1950s, her body was less body and more battlefield map. Gangrene crept into her right leg, threatening to poison the rest. Doctors decided to amputate below the knee. She joked darkly, "They took my leg, but left me enough ass to sit and paint." The wheelchair became her throne. Friends found her sitting in it, swirling tequila, singing, cursing politicians, blessing friends, painting as much as pain allowed. She wore more flowers, more color, as if daring death to find her in a riot instead of in a quiet bed. Her first solo exhibition in Mexico almost didn't see her in person. Doctors told her not to leave the bed, so she had it carried to the gallery instead. Guests arrived to find the artist lying among her own paintings, like a living installation on the theme of stubbornness. Reporters asked if her art was surreal. She shook her head. "I never painted dreams," she replied. "I painted my reality." For most people, those two things are separate. For Frida, they had always been the same. She wrote in her diary in jagged lines and splashes of color, "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" It was not denial of her condition, but a dare to herself. If flesh failed, imagination would have to grow stronger muscles. Her last public appearance was not in a gallery, but on the streets. Despite fever and weakness, she demanded to join a protest against U.S. intervention in Guatemala. Wrapped in shawls, in a wheelchair, she held a red flag almost as big as herself. Even near the end, she arrived as both artist and activist. In July 1954, at 47, her lungs finally refused their part in the performance. Officially, it was a pulmonary embolism. Unofficially, it was a long war ending. On her nightstand, they found a last diary note. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." At her funeral, she lay in a coffin draped with a communist flag. As they slid her into the cremation chamber, the sudden heat made her body sit up for an instant, hair blooming into flames. Some witnesses swore it looked like one of her own paintings, half terrifying, half holy. For a time, her house became just another address. Canvases gathered dust, diaries slept, colors waited. Diego, shattered, promised to turn their blue house into a museum, a shrine to the woman who had painted herself into his life and into history. As the 1960s and 70s rolled in, new generations went looking for saints of rebellion and icons of resistance. They found Frida, eyebrows like banners, gaze like a challenge. Feminists saw a woman who refused to be defined by her womb, her husband, or her wounds. Queer communities saw someone who had loved outside straight lines. Slowly, museums pulled her works out of storage. Self-portraits that once seemed too raw now felt perfectly timed. Audiences, tired of polished fantasies, lined up to stare at a woman who had painted her miscarriages, her surgeries, her fury. The lines outside her exhibitions grew longer, like bandages around an old wound the world finally wanted to look at. Then came the t-shirts, mugs, phone cases, tote bags. Her face, once a lonely, wounded self-portrait, now marched across fast fashion racks and souvenir stands. Some called it betrayal, turning a life of pain into merch. Others saw it as proof. She had escaped the canvas and entered the bloodstream of pop culture. Hollywood and Netflix followed. Biopics with famous actresses in flower crowns, soundtracks swelling, awards shows applauding. For many viewers, that was their first meeting with Frida, through a screen, not a canvas. Some stayed for the costumes, others for the uncomfortable honesty behind them. Art schools began to assign her alongside Picasso, Dalí, Rivera. But where their names often came with stories of genius detached from consequences, hers arrived with hospital beds and blood. She showed that the artist's life is not separate from the work. It bleeds directly into it. Some critics accused her fans of romanticizing suffering, turning chronic pain and disability into an aesthetic. But Frida had never asked anyone to admire her pain. She asked them to witness it and to recognize their own, hidden under makeup and small talk. In an era obsessed with perfection, filters, and smooth surfaces, Her unibrow became a weapon. Teens on social media drew their own, thicker, darker, in solidarity. She had turned what polite society considered flaws into a flag for radical self-acceptance. Look closely, and the myth of Frida splits into at least two figures. One is the pop icon, flower crown, bright lipstick, easy quote on a mug. The other is the woman who spent months staring at ceilings, begging her spine to hold one more day. Between them lies the uncomfortable question: which version do we really love? Frida did not conquer nations, draft constitutions, or command armies. Her battlefields were mirrors, beds, and small wooden panels. She turned her own body, scarred, pierced, stitched, into a map of what it means to keep living when life refuses to get easier. She once wrote, "I am my own muse." In a world that constantly told women to inspire others but not themselves, this was a quiet revolution. She did not wait for a man, a church, or a country to give her meaning. She looked into the mirror and built a universe from what she found there. Since her death, every generation has approached her with its own questions. How do you live with illness? How do you love someone who breaks you and still remain yourself? How do you take the ugliest parts of your story and make something from them that glows? Frida Kahlo did not paint to decorate living rooms. She painted so that her pain would not devour her in the dark. A girl struck by disease, a young woman torn open by metal, a wife betrayed, a body amputated, who refused to vanish quietly. She entered history as a wounded painter in a blue house. She lives in it now as something more dangerous. The proof that even a broken life can burn unbearably bright.